The latest episode of The Last of Us, titled Endure and Survive, opened 10 days before we saw Joel and Ellie enter Kansas City, and it allowed us to see exactly how Henry and Sam became the most wanted people in the area, and the main reason as to why Kathleen wanted to get them. With their paths crossing with Joel and Ellie's, we saw familiar scenes from the game play out, including the iconic ripping of you-know-what, and the tragic ending that nobody wanted to see, especially after watching the episode unfold. So with that, let's recap, break down, and explain all that there was to take away from the episode. So let's get into it. Here is The Last of Us Episode 5 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Who are Henry and Sam? Sam and Henry were two brothers that were on the run from the Resistance inside of Kansas City. We saw that 10 days prior to the evening that they met Joel and Ellie, they were on the run on the night that the Resistance took over the federal-run city and overthrew them. Hence what we saw during the opening scene. The Resistance, which was led by Kathleen, were calling out for collaborators to be rounded up and hunted, and this is exactly what Henry was. However, he wasn't one because he wanted to rat on people. He was one through necessity and the need to keep his brother alive. Collaborators were individuals that would give information or people to Fedra in order to be rewarded with some kind of personal item. As we heard Kathleen state, she said that it would often be alcohol or medicines that weren't available widely. This was what Henry needed for Sam, a medicine to keep him alive. And this was the reason as to why Henry and Sam were on the run, because they collaborated with Fedra and gave up somebody who Henry actually viewed as a kind, good person. And this was Kathleen's brother. Hence why she was prepared to turn the entire city over until she found him. Kathleen's brother ended up being killed by Fedra whilst he was detained, so it was a hunt that was driven by revenge, despite the fact that Kathleen's brother didn't want that. As the episode went on, we saw that Henry was the mastermind behind the plan of utilizing the tunnels to provide the safest way to get out of the city, but it all turned out to be for nothing. When they were spotted by somebody working with the Resistance essentially guarding the bridge out of the city, they phoned into Kathleen and we saw Henry essentially give himself up, only until all different types of infected came running out of the ground. Clickers, runners, and even bloaters. This was what essentially provided them all time to escape, but by then it was too late. Sam was bitten in an altercation and we saw in a shot that was near on the exact same as what was in the game, he'd turned by sunlight. Henry had to do what he believed was right in the moment and he killed his own brother. Henry had never fired a weapon before or killed somebody with his own hands, and the only person he ended up ever killing was his brother, the person he wanted to protect. It was almost like a curse. You could sense the guilt that was in Henry's face, especially after there being a line about a new day and a new start being on the horizon. Then, due to him killing the only person that he truly cared about and was essentially living for, he turned on himself. It was an extremely emotional and sad moment and really hit. Why didn't Ellie's blood work as a cure? Well, I suppose the easy answer to that is it's just not that simple. We saw a moment of compassion from Ellie, and I don't know whether it was because Ellie genuinely believed that she'd be able to cure Sam, or if she just wanted him to feel safe and unafraid in his final moments because she saw that he was scared. However, her blood in its own right was not enough to save Sam from turning. He ultimately ended up succumbing to the cordyceps infection the morning after he was bitten, and there was nothing that could have been done about it. Ellie was also extremely lucky that she wasn't harmed during the night when he turned, seeing as though she fell asleep. Kathleen's fate. Kathleen's journey in this show was an interesting one. She was an extremely soft-spoken individual, and we saw that inside of her she had good intentions. She wanted the people of Kansas City to be able to live for themselves and not be ruled by the oppressive Fedra. And it was because of her that the city actually became free. As good of a man that Kathleen's brother was, he never actually managed to achieve anything as the leader of the Resistance. However, with Kathleen, we saw two different sides. We saw the soft-spoken, good-intention-filled side, and we also saw the burned up with anger and revenge-driven Kathleen, a side that meant that she turned on anybody that wronged her or stood in the way of her vision, being the judge, jury, and executioner as we saw in the opening moments of the show, where she essentially had about 20 collaborators killed on the spot. She came close to seeking her revenge, however, with the battle that was going on between the hunters and the infected, we saw that the small girl that was on the verge of getting Ellie moments earlier ended up jumping on Kathleen and biting her. Her end was something that felt as though it was fitting for the character. She had good intentions to start with, but the power ended up almost getting the better of her. Joel and Ellie. Joel and Ellie didn't have tons of dialogue in this episode. This episode was more dialogue driven between the hunters, Kathleen and Henry. However, they were more responders than dictators of conversation. Joel and Ellie's relationship is something that's definitely starting to strengthen, and we're starting to see that he'd now go out of his way to save her, and not just look out for himself. We saw him take out the person that was in the building in the distance, firing at them all. But before doing so, we saw him look over at the bridge where I feel for a brief moment he contemplated the fact that he could leave, but he chose not to. We also saw him getting the closest to looking back on his past since the whole show began. Henry mentioned how although Ellie wasn't his daughter, he knew that he had one in the past, and you could see that it impacted his mental state in that moment, having to think about her. But he didn't completely shut it down like he'd previously been doing in other episodes. It seems as though he's understanding that Ellie is human and she's actually far stronger than he ever anticipated. With Ellie writing "I'm sorry" where Sam and Henry were buried, you could see that he felt guilty for her having the weight of Sam's death on her mind. We're definitely seeing them grow closer and him actually care for Ellie in ways like we've never seen before, and it's actually really wholesome and nice to see. With Ellie being fearful of being alone, it makes even more sense as to why she's so outspoken and wants to always show that she's there with Joel, because she's worried that she'll be left on her own. It makes that shot even more sad where Joel could have run to the bridge, because that would have left Ellie in her worst nightmare. The Bloaters and the Infected. Within this episode, we got to see all different types of infected and a scene of chaos like we hadn't seen since the first episode. It started with us seeing the usual runners and stalkers. Not seeing them in a while, I forgot how quick they actually were. They were horrific to see running towards people, and the sheer speed of them was just so unmatched. However, after this, we saw the bloaters then emerge. Bloaters are a far more advanced stage of the infection. We heard that the infected were run underground around 15 years ago. This meant that there was plenty of time for this latter stage to be formed, as it does take several years to get to the bloater stage. Bloaters are slower. However, what they lack in speed, they make up for in strength. They've also evolved to have an armor that protects them from the usual weapons that are used against the infected. We also got to see an iconic bloater move where they rip the head off their victims. It was absolutely brutal, but epic to see unfold. So I imagine we'll probably see more of them as the episodes go on. I thought this episode was a good one. It had the perfect balance of understanding new characters, reminding us of the threat that was present with the infected, but also showing us that there are other dangers out there other than just the infected, and they can be just as deadly. Henry and Sam were two characters that were delivered perfectly in this show, and I thought their scenes were beautiful to watch that showed a dynamic like Joel and Ellie's. However, we saw how it can go terribly wrong. The bloaters were a great inclusion, and I'm glad we got to see the infected on a large scale and showing how they can quite literally tear through a group of people in a matter of minutes. I'm looking forward to seeing the next episode and how Joel will be when he finally gets to Wyoming with Ellie. It's far from over, and there's still so much more to go. So, there you have it, The Last of Us Episode 5 Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos such as Endings Explained, theories and predictions and character breakdowns, then click on the I button, or alternatively you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. If you'd like to give me a show or movie that you'd like me to review, then head over to my Twitter, @brainpilot_, and tweet me what show or movie you'd like me to review next. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rate the latest movies that don't quite make the cut to getting a dedicated video, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. What did you think of this episode? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.